Hello friends, welcome back. Myself Pushpender Singh, and we are going to start with our daily current affairs. So today you have 12th of July 2021. As you know that these lectures are useful for those who are preparing for the civil services examination, which is conducted by the UPSC as well as other government competitive examinations. And we are specifically referring to the two newspapers, the first, The Hindu and Indian Express. You can also refer to these two newspapers for your current affairs, and you can subscribe uh, this channel on the YouTube for these lectures so that you could supplement your preparation. Alright, so let's begin with the lecture. So first news is all about Uttar Pradesh Population Policy 2021-30. Okay, so on the World Population Day, the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister, Mr. Yogi Adityanath, has released the state's new population policy. As you know that Uttar Pradesh is the most populous state in our country, right? Its population is around 220 million, right? Which is the highest population in our country among the states, right? The Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister have aiming to reduce the growth rate of the Uttar Pradesh, that is to 2.1% over the next 10 years with the help of this new population policy which was inaugurated by him, right? And why this UP government, or why the Uttar Pradesh basically needed such policies? As you know that Uttar Pradesh is the most populous state in our country, which is having the population of almost 220 million, okay, as per the census. And as you know that Uttar Pradesh is also having limitation in terms of its ecological and economic resources to sustain this towering population, right? And because of that, a lot of people are not having enough resources to sustain. So to optimize those resources, right, the controlling in the population is very important. And it's most important that it is very necessary that provision of the all basic necessities of the human life, okay, that is economic opportunities, the livelihood opportunities, right, as well as the secure the good life, right, it's to be accessible to all population, to all people. And for that, the controlling of the population is much important. Now let us understand about the provisions of the policy. What are the important provisions that was inaugurated, right, through this policy? So first of all, the provision related to this legislation of this policy will apply to the married couple, okay, where the boy should not be less than 21 years of the age and the girl should not be less than 18 years of the age, which is at the age limit for the marriage or for the marriage specifically within the UP. Okay, and it's more important that the government of UP is emphasizing on the contraceptive tablets or the contraception as well as the abortion. So state population policy also focus on the efforts to increase the accessibility of contraceptive measures to control the population under the family planning program. Okay, and it will be it will be provide some sort of a proper system for the safe abortion also in the state. So the focus area specifically in the state of UP include reduction in the newborns as well as the reduction in the maternal mortality rate. So the reduction in the newborn, okay, with the help of these contraceptions, and it will also be focused on the elderly people. So care will be provided to the elderly people, better management to the people, specifically to the education, health. It will also cater to the needs of the adolescents, specifically the nutrition, right? Specifically the adolescents which are in the age of 11 to 18 years of the age, okay, and which will be ensured through this policy step. The next most important provision of the UP population policy is perks. So here the UP government is planning to, target those population through the perks. So here the state government will give the promotions, increments, concessions in the housing schemes, okay, as well as it will also provide other perks to the employees who adhere to the reduced population control norms in the state, right? And those specifically employees who is having two or less than two children with them. So the public servants who adopt this two child norm, okay, in the state of UP will get two additional increment. So this additional increments will be provided, okay, to those personals who basically adhere to this two-child norm. It's a very important, and the maternity as well as other facilities will also be provided to them. Regarding paternity leave, so the people who will adhere to these norms, right? So they will be applicable for this paternity leave of 12 months, right? With a full salary as well as the allowances, right? As well as a 3% increase in the employer's contribution fund under the national pension scheme. So they will be provided this 3% increase in the employer's contribution specifically under the national pension scheme. And those who are not the government employees and still adhere to this two-child norm of the government of UP, right, will also get the benefit in terms of the rebates in the taxes on the water, say rebates in taxes of the housing or the home loans. So it is applicable to all, whether it's a government employee or not. Right? It also states that the maternity center will also be set up at all primary healthcare centers. With that introduction, okay. And it will also have some inputs regarding sterilization also. So as per the draft policy, several initiatives have also been initiated to the people, right? Specifically, including the public servant, so that they could adopt these norms, undergoing the voluntary sterilization among the males. Okay, so this incentive also, or this incentivized also provide the 3% increase in the employer's contribution also under the national pension scheme. Two additional increment will also be providing to those people who provide or who undergoes this voluntary sterilization. Okay, and they will also be provide a subsidy towards the purchase of plot or house site or the building of the house, right? So they will be providing this subsidy also along with these benefits. Okay, and it's more important, the couple who are living below the poverty line and who have only one child, right? Those people which are BPL and who are living below poverty line, specifically under this and goes this sterilization process, right? They will also be eligible to get the payment of one time around 80,000 rupees. So they will be provided around 80,000 rupees if the single child boy, and if the single child is girl, they will be provided a 1 lakh rupees under the new population policy. So it's a very important. It's basically emphasizing on the specifically targeting the population for the voluntary sterilization through these incentives. And who will not benefit from the law, or who are the most adverse conditions specifically, right? So according to the bill, the people who are having more than 2 children in the UP, right, will be debarred from the benefit of the government sponsored welfare schemes. And for example, they cannot contest the local courts also, and they will also be ineligible to apply the government jobs also under the state, or they will also be ineligible to receiving any kind of subsidy. They will not get any sort of a promotion in the government jobs, right? And they would be they would be getting the limited opportunities from the government in that aspect. So here you could see that Mr. Yogi Adityanath, who released this population policy for 2021-2030, right? Specifically to reduce this maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rates in a time-bound manner in this 10 years. So the Yogi Adityanath is basically specifically eyeing on reduction of this total fertility rate in the UP from current 2.7 percentage to the 2.1. Okay, specifically by 2026, and thereby for the long-term goal that is around 1.7 by 2030. Okay, the population policy also provide the scope of the contraception or the contraceptive prevalence specifically among the UP, that would increase from 31.7 percentage to 45 percentage by 2026, and then by 2030 the contraceptives availability among the population should also increase to 52%, and the male methods of the contraceptive use should also be increased from 10.8% to 15.1 percentage by 2026 as per the UP population policy. And the UP population policy also aimed at decreasing the maternal mortality rate or MMR, that is the deaths of the mother per lakh live birth, which is currently 197, which is on the higher side. It should reduce to 150 by 2026, and it should further reduce to 98 by 2030. Okay, it is also aimed at decreasing the infant mortality rate, that is the number of infant deaths per thousand live births, which is also on the higher side, that is 43. Currently, it should reduce to 32 by 2026 and further by 2030, that is around 22. It is also aiming at decreasing in under 5 mortality rate, that is the number of the children's die, that is under 5 years of the age per thousand live birth, right? That is currently from 47 to 35 by 2016 and 2026 and further 25 by 2030. So these are some of the ambitious the goals of the UP government, specifically for the time bound the family planning process. The next, the China eliminated malaria. So recently, the China and El Salvador both have declared the malaria free by the World Health Organization. Now let us understand first of all what is malaria and how the China is able to eliminate the malaria from the country. So it's very important. So malaria is first of all is a disease is caused by a parasite, right? This parasite named as the Plasmodium vivax or P. flareum. Okay, and this parasite is specifically spread to the humans through the bite of a mosquito or infected mosquito. Okay, and the people who have the malaria usually they feel very sick, and that will have the high fever. Okay, and they will also have the shaking chills. They feel cold, right? And this disease is very uncommon in the temperate climates. It's the most common in the tropical climates like India. Okay, but malaria is very common in the tropical and subtropical climates. So it's very uncommon in the temperate climates. Okay. Now let us understand how many countries have successfully eliminated this malaria so far. So since 1900, around 127 countries in the world have registered the malaria free status, or they have got this malaria free status. Okay, and definitely it's not an easy task to get this certificate from the WHO or from the World Health Organization. It definitely need a proper planning, okay, and a strategic action plan which is based on the local situations among the people. Okay, and all these countries which followed the existing tools and the strategies like to achieve this malaria elimination goal. It was very successful. Okay, the main focus was on surveillance among the population to control this outbreak of this malaria among the population. Now let us understand how the China would be able to eliminate this malaria. So China followed the specific strategy to contain this malaria. That is the strong surveillance, that is 137 system that was followed by the China. Okay, so that is one means the malaria diagnosis within 1 day. Okay, and the 3 days for the case investigation, and by day 7, right, there will be a public health response among the public health providers. So it's a very important 137 system. So here the most important is that the molecular malaria surveillance, okay, for the drug resistance as well as the genome based approaches to distinguish between the indigenous and imported case that was basically brought to China from outside. It was also conducted in the China. Okay, and all borders to the neighboring countries were thoroughly screened by the China to prevent the entry of unwanted malaria in the country. So the huge work was done by the officials of the China to contain this malaria in the country. What is the current scenario in India? In India, the situation is very pathetic. As per the Global Malaria Report 2020, the World Health Organization, shared that India has almost 2% of the global malaria cases in 2019. So India has got almost 2% of the total malaria cases in the world. Okay, so India has the great history of the malaria control. The highest incidence of the malaria occurred in 1950s initially. Okay, with an almost 75 million cases of the malaria that was reported in 1950s, and there was almost 0.8 million deaths at that point of the time per year. All right, then the government of India also launched the National Malaria Control Program. Okay, this program was launched by the government of India specifically in 1953. And also the National Malaria Eradication Program. This National Malaria Eradication Program was launched in 1958, right? The main purpose of this national malaria, control program and national malaria eradication program in 1958 to bring down the malaria cases to almost 1 lakh, right? And with no reported deaths by 1961, right? And this was a great achievement that was basically made by the India at that point of the time. But definitely there was unexpected resurgence after that, and from being almost total elimination of this malaria in 1960s or in 1961, the malaria was resurged again in 1976. In 1976, there was around 6.4 million malaria cases was reported. Okay, since then the confirmed cases have been increasing, okay, decreasing, and almost in 2009, if you take the data, sorry, in 2019, if you take the data of 2019, almost zero point 0.4 million cases were reported from the malaria, and there was 80 deaths from the malaria in 2019. This is a huge, and India accounted almost 88% of the malaria cases and 86% of the all malaria deaths, specifically in Southeast Asia region. So in the Southeast Asia, the India reported almost 88% of the malaria cases and almost 86 percentage of the malaria deaths. So this is also huge, and it is the only country outside Africa which is having the world 11 high burden impact countries specifically among the world. So it's a huge task, right, for the planners specifically in India to eliminate the malaria. India is also signatory of the National Framework for the Malaria Elimination 2016 to 2030, right, which is aiming at total malaria elimination by 2030. This framework, that is National Framework for Malaria Elimination, has been outlined with a vision to eliminate the disease from the country, right, which will contribute to the improved health with the quality of the life and poverty elimination. Okay, and recently the China has also collaborated with the Harvard University as well as the MIT for molecular malaria surveillance, and India could use that technique of molecular malaria surveillance to contain this disease. Okay, in India there are very dedicated expert scientists who can take up such assignments to contain this malaria in the country. This is when we require. Okay. Next, the election of the speaker and the deputy speaker. So this news is in the backdrop of the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly, which have been working without a speaker for most of this year. Okay, so the election of the speaker and the deputy speaker is pending in the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly. So these elections of the speaker and the deputy speaker. So here the most important aspect is that the speaker is basically the presiding officer of the lower house of the state legislature. The deputy speaker is also a deputy to the speaker who can also preside over the meetings of the state legislative assembly. So the constitution specifies these offices. First of all, and Article 93 of the constitution, which provides the speaker for the Lok Sabha, and Article 178, which provides the speaker for the state legislative assemblies. Okay, that provide that they should enable, right, the election of those speaker as soon as they may be. Okay, and it's very important that in the Lok Sabha, in the state legislature, the president sets the date for the election of speaker. So in the case of Lok Sabha, the president fixed the date for the election of speaker. In the case of state legislature, the governor fixed the date for the speaker. This is very important, and it is the speaker who decide again the date of deputy speaker, for the date of election of the deputy speaker. So the legislatures of our respective houses vote to elect one among themselves to these offices. This is very important, and constitution provides that the office of the speaker should never be empty, and he should also continue to continue to be in the office until the new speaker basically assumes the charge. So it's very important. Okay, usually the speaker comes from the ruling party. This is very important. So in the case of the deputy speaker of the Lok Sabha, right, the position was varied, right, all along the years. So until the fourth Lok Sabha, the Congress or the ruling party has both speaker and the deputy speaker. But from the fifth Lok Sabha, okay, because of the emergency, first time the independent member, was elected as a deputy speaker. Since then there was, a convention that the speaker would be from the ruling party and the deputy speaker would come from the main opposition party. So current tradition also followed, and currently the speaker belongs to the main ruling party and deputy speaker basically goes to the main opposition party. Okay. And their role is very, very important. The speaker is basically the principal spokesperson of the house. It's very, very important. And as you know that according to the book practice and the procedure of the parliament, right, the speaker is basically the principal spokesperson of the house. He represents the collective voice of the house, and he is also the sole representative to the outside world with respect to the Lok Sabha. Okay, and obviously the speaker presides over the the proceedings of the house, whether it's a Lok Sabha or the state legislative assembly. Right, whenever the president calls for the joint sitting, right, for the two houses, that is for the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, definitely the speaker invariably presides over the meeting of such joint sitting. Okay, and the most important aspect is that speaker decides whether the bill is money bill or not. That means he endorses the bill as a money bill. His endorsement is most important. It's beyond the judicial review. And the deputy speaker is basically independent of the speaker. Definitely he is not subordinate to him, and both are elected by the members of house in that respect. Okay. Now, what is the issue? What is the issue over the time limit of the election? So, first of all, the constitution neither sets a time limit nor specifies the process for this elections specifically. So, it leaves to the state legislatures to decide how to hold these elections. For example, Haryana and Uttar Pradesh both specify, the time frame to hold the elections to the speaker and the deputy speaker. Okay, so both are having specified the time frame for that. In Haryana, the election of the speaker has to be taken place as soon as possible after the election, right? And in Uttar Pradesh, this has set around 15 days time limit. Okay, 15 days time limit to the speaker's post if it falls vacant during the term of assembly. So within 15 days, the new speaker should have to be elected within 15 days. Such type of practice may be adopted by the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly to elect the new speaker. Okay. Next, the EAM. Okay. Hand over the relics. EAM is External Affairs Minister handovers the relics of the 17th century Georgian Queen Saint Kativan to the Georgia. So it's a long-standing request from the Georgia, right? Our External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, have handed over the holy relics of the 17th century Georgian Queen Saint Kativan to the Georgia nearly 16 years after it has been found in the Goa, and it has been requested by the Georgia to hand over to the captain. Now, let us understand who is this 17th century Georgian Queen Saint Kativan. So, Georgian Queen was basically 17th century Georgian Queen, okay, and from Kakheti, right, which is a kingdom in the eastern Georgia. Okay, she was tortured at that point of the time, and she was killed in 1624 in Shiraz, right, during the rule of the Safavid dynasty that was basically clashed with the Georgia's kingdom. Okay, and the Portuguese missionaries, as you know that the Portuguese was also, the colonial rulers who ruled, right, the Goa and adjoining territory. So these Portuguese missionaries, right, they have said to carry out the relics, okay, of the 17th century queen of the Georgia, right, Saint Kativan to India, specifically to the Goa in 1627, right. These Portuguese missionaries have brought this, this relic or this holy relic to India. And in 2005, after years of the research and the study of the medieval Portuguese records, this relic was found in Saint Augustine Church. This Saint Augustine Church is basically in the old Goa, in the old Goa. And since then, the Georgia is continuously requesting, right, the India to return this holy relic back to the Georgia. Okay, and what is the importance of the Georgia for India? Okay, so first of all, the Georgia is strategically important country as it is situated at the intersection of Eastern Europe and the Western Asia, which is also the main connecting spot for the trade and the commerce. And the relations between the Georgia and the India dates back to the ancient time. Okay, specifically the Panch Tantra, which influenced this Georgian folk legends. So during the medieval periods, specifically these Georgian missionaries, okay, they traveled, they basically came and they visited India, okay, and some of the Georgians basically also served in the course of the Mughal emperors, specifically in India. Okay, and few of those basically rose to the rank of the governor under the Mughal rule. Okay, and India was among the first country to officially recognize Georgia in 26th of December 1991, and India was the net exporter to the Georgia, right, with respect to the trade and commerce. For example, the main commodities which is exported by the India to the Georgia are cereals, okay, the nuclear reactors, okay, the boilers, machineries, and mechanical appliances. Apart from pharmaceutical, selective machineries, aluminium articles, which are also being exported to the Georgia by the India. So India is basically the net exporter to the Georgia in that respect. Okay. Next, you have the Mekedatu Dam project. So here, both Karnataka and the Tamil Nadu, both are again at the loggerheads, or both are started fighting against this Mekedatu Dam project on the Kaveri River basin. This Mekedatu Dam project was originally a hydroelectric project, but it has now been enhanced to the multi-purpose project. So, what is that Mekedatu project? The Mekedatu in the basically in the local language, it means a goat's leap. Okay, so it is a deep gorge which is situated on the confluence of the river Kaveri and Arkavathi in Karnataka, or Karnataka and Tamil Nadu border, which is around 100 kilometers from the Bangalore, right? And it is at the Kanapura taluk in the Karnataka's Ramanagara district specifically. So here it is a Karnataka's project which is planning to develop this Mekedatu project as a hydroelectric project, as well as one of the most important aspect is that it is also planning to have this a multi-purpose project for various aspects. So here in 2013, okay, the Karnataka announced the construction of this multi-purpose reservoir project called Mekedatu Dam project, and this project basically that was aimed at alleviation of the drinking water problem, specifically in the Bengaluru and the Ramanagara districts, right, of the Karnataka, where this Mekedatu Dam project is located, and it is also expected to generate the hydroelectric power, okay, to meet the power needs of the state, specifically in that respect. So, what is the issue with that project? Okay, so issue with that project is that very simple, that soon after this project was announced, okay, the TNA has, or Tamil Nadu has objected the granting of the permission, right, or the environmental clearance which was given to this Mekedatu projects. For example, explaining the potential for the damage that it caused to the lower riparian state like Tamil Nadu, the Tamil Nadu started objecting for that, and the Tamil Nadu started stating that it is simply a violation of the award which was given by the Kaveri, water dispute tribunal. This Kaveri water dispute tribunal, which award came in 2007, which has basically demarcated this water, right? And Tamil Nadu stated that this project will affect the natural flow of this river of Kaveri, right? And it will considerably affect the irrigation or the irrigated water in the Tamil Nadu. So, what do this Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal and the Supreme Court says regarding this dispute? So, definitely the final award regarding to the Kaveri Water Dispute by award came from the Kaveri Water Dispute Tribunal that has started distributing this water among all the riparian states. For example, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, apart from the union territory of Pondicherry. Okay, and definitely all the states were basically agitated by this award, and the states basically appealed to the Supreme Court against this award, and in February 2018, right, the court, or specifically the Supreme Court in its judgment, revised this water allocation and increased the share of the Karnataka by 14.75 thousand meter cube feet, that is TMCF. So it has increased the share of the Karnataka by this 14.75 thousand million cubic feet. So right, at the cost of Tamil Nadu. Definitely, and encouraged by this award which was given by the Supreme Court, the Karnataka, started further pursuing this project of the Megadato, right, which was also encouraged by the Supreme Court verdict. So originally this project was a hydroelectric power project, but now it is one of the most important projects, and the hydroelectric power which can generate through this project is around 400 megawatt, which is being generated from this. And Karnataka government also arguing that the proposed reservoir would regulate the flow to the Tamil Nadu on a monthly basis, right? And it will also take care of the lower riparian states in that respect. So here you will have the Mekedatu, which is at the border of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Okay. Next, 2020 Millennium Technology Prize. So it's a very important. The 2020 Millennium Technology Prize was basically announced. Here, to Shankar Balasubramaniam and David Kellner for the development of the revolutionary next DNA sequencing. Okay. So this award was basically awarded or been disclosed for that, and it's a very important. Let us understand what is about Millennium Technology Prize. So this Millennium Technology Prize is one of the world's largest technology prizes in the world, and it has been awarded every 2 years by the Technology Academy Finland. Okay, which is basically an independent fund which is established by the Finnish industry, okay, and Finnish state in the partnership. Now let us understand what is this next generation DNA sequencing. So this next generation sequencing is basically a massively parallel sequencing technology that offers ultra high throughput scalability and the speed. So this technology is used to determine the order of the nucleotides in the entire genomes and targeted regions of DNA and the RNA. So these technologies allows for the sequencing of the DNA and the RNA, which is more quickly and cheaply than previously used sequencing. Okay, and this next generation sequencing has revolutionized the biological sciences and allowing various labs to perform the wide varieties of the applications and the study of biological systems, right, at the level that have been not done even before. So more than 1 million base pair can be sequenced with this next generation DNA sequence, which can translate to hundreds of the genes, right, even the whole genome of the organism. And this is made possible definitely by simultaneously sequencing the hundreds of the pieces of the DNA at the same time with the help of this next generation DNA sequencing technology. Next, the Kaseria Buddhist Stupa. So world famous Kaseria Buddhist Stupa was basically in the East Champaran district of the Bihar, is in the news because of the waterlogging condition. It is because of the floods that have inundated a part of the district, specifically in the Champaran district, and which is also in the waters of the catchment area of the river Gandak, because of the Gandak, which is basically causing the water logging or the flooding conditions, specifically in the East Champaran district where this Kaseria Buddhist Stupa is located. So this Kaseria Buddhist Stupa is located around 110 kilometers from the state capital Patna, and it is basically having the circumference of almost 400 feet, and it is standing around at the height of around 104 feet. It is the first construction of the nationally protected stupa, which is dated around 3rd century BCE or before Christ. Okay, so it's the first construction for that, and it is regarded the largest Buddhist stupa in the world, Okay, and it has been drawing the tourists from across the Buddhist countries. Okay, and this stupa's exploration have started in 19th century only. Okay, and it was discovered by the Colonel Mackenzie in 1840. Okay, and later it was excavated by Cunningham in 1861 and 62, and in 1998 also the Archaeological Survey of India team, also led by K.K. Mohammed, have also excavated this site. Okay, so this original Kaseria stupa is said to be date back to the emperor of Ashoka, that is around 250 before Christ or BCE, as the remains of the Ashokan pillar was also there. Okay, and in the accounts of the foreign travelers also, this stupa mound may have been inaugurated during the Buddhist time around 250 BCE, and it corresponds to the many aspect to the description of the stupa which erected by the Lakshmis, okay, of the Vaishali, to the house that is basically also related to the Buddhist time. The Chinese travelers, like you have the Faiyan, was also described, who traveled to India was also described or was also mentioned in stupa, right? The Huan San was also a Chinese traveler who was also emphasized about this stupa. Okay, so it is basically the world largest stupa. Okay, next, the Sikkim is home to around 27% of the India's flowering plant. So Sikkim, though is a small state, right? It is less than 1% of the India's landmass, but it is home to around 27% of the flowering plants in our country. It has been revealed by a publication by the Botanical Survey of India. So the Sikkim is rich in terms of the floral composition. A pictorial guide which lists around 4,912 naturally occurring flower plants in the Sikkim. A total number of naturally occurring flower plants in the country, it is standing around 18,004, right? Species. That many species are there, specifically in the Sikkim. Okay, and it has also 4,912 species, right, of the flowering plants in the Sikkim, which is spreading around 7,000 square kilometers of the area. Now, one thing that is coming to your mind is why the Sikkim is having the largest diversity. So first of all, the Sikkim is a part of the Kanchenjunga Biosphere Reserve, right, which is basically having the different altitudinal ecosystems, which provides opportunities for this floral, the herbs as well as the trees to grow and thrive across this, this altitudinal ecosystems. So the state is also bordered with the China, with the Bhutan and the Nepal. As well, it is also bordered with the Darjeeling region of West Bengal. If you see the map, okay. So here, every type of vegetation you can find. For example, it can also have the subalpine vegetation to the temperate vegetation to the tropical vegetation. Okay, so state had a different kind of vegetation because of the different altitudinal ecosystems, and it is the reason for the much diversity of the flora. Right, the elevation which varies in the state of between 300 meters from the mean sea level to around 8,598 meters above the mean sea level, right, which is at the top of the Mount Kanchenjunga, as you know that, which is the height of around 8,586 meters from the mean sea level. The next in the news, that is the Lemru Elephant Reserve. So it is the new reserve which have been proposed in the Chhattisgarh. Okay, in the pipeline for 20 years from now. Right? Now it has been the subject of another controversy over the reduction of its size. Now, what is the move? Why we are mainly emphasizing of this Lemru Elephant Reserve? Okay, so this proposal for this reserve, for the construction of this Lemru Elephant Reserve, right, was initiated by the Chhattisgarh, specifically the Korba district. It was passed unanimously by the Assembly of Chhattisgarh in 2005. Okay, and got the central approval in 2007. The Lemru that we are talking, okay, is one of the two elephant reservoir which was, reserves which was specifically planned to prevent the human-animal conflict, specifically in the state of Chhattisgarh. Okay, and the elephant is specifically moving into the Chhattisgarh from the Odisha and the Jharkhand through this Korba district or through this corridor. This area which was proposed was around 450 square kilometer, and it was supposed to be named as the Lemru Elephant Reserve. Now, why does the government want to reduce the size of this reserve now? The area which was proposed under this reserve was also a part of the Hasdeo Aranya forest, which is a very diverse biozone, which is also rich in terms of the coal deposits. Right now, 22 coal blocks which have been recently been identified. The seven have already been allotted to the different conglomerates, right, where the mines are running, okay, and the process are being, established for allocation of the remaining coal blocks. So under the new policy, that is no go area policy, which was adopted by the government of India, right? Specifically, entire area was considered out of bound for the mine, right? But definitely by 2020, only five coal blocks from the region, put on the auction list. So more blocks can be put on the auction through this no-go area policy, and which is expected to reduce the size of the reserve in that emphasis. Now, the most important thing why this reserve is important. So here the North Chhattisgarh alone is home to around 240 elephants. Okay, and the elephants in the Chhattisgarh are relatively new. They started moving in undivided Madhya Pradesh in 1990. Okay, since these animals were relatively new, the human-animal conflict started, just because of their movement across the states. And to reduce this human-animal conflict, this type of plan was basically initiated by the government of Chhattisgarh. Okay, next is the Soberana 2. The Soberana 2 is basically the homegrown COVID-19 vaccine from the Cuba, okay, which has delivered with the booster shot of the Soberana Plus, okay, and according to the Cuban authority, it has around 91% of efficacy against the symptomatic COVID-19 cases, and it has been demonstrated across the large clinical trials which was conducted in the Cuba. If this vaccine is approved in the name of the Soberana 2, it will be the Cuba's first Latin American country, or it will, or the Cuba will become the first Latin American country to manufacture and to produce the such vaccine indigenously, right, against this COVID-19. And the Soberana 2 is delivered through the three dose design, that is 1, 2, and 3. Okay, two shots of the Soberana 2 and one shot the Soberana Plus, that is for the booster dose. It was taken in the gap of the 0, 28 days and 56 days resign. So you can say that within 3 months, almost 3 months, okay, all three doses can be administered to the people, which shows that the efficacy of around 91.2 percentage once all three doses have been taken. So it has been given by the COVID-19 task force, which basically announced this Soberana 2, the COVID-19 vaccine. So it's a protein vaccine, right, which is basically made up of the protein which is derived from the virus, and which then binds to the human cells to trigger the human response among the people to contain the virus, specifically who are infected with the COVID-19 symptoms. Okay. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. We'll meet again tomorrow for our next current affairs. Thank you.